joined by Brandon Marcello. You can catch his work at CBS Sports and 247. Brandon, good morning, buddy. How you doing?
I'm doing well. We're one day closer to actual football, so I'm great.
Good, man. So I guess I'll start things off with the obvious question. I saw your top 25. A&M was in there. Just your thoughts on what you think Coach Elko can do in his first year.
Well, I just look what he did at Duke in those first 2 years, but his 2 years there. But to me, what I love about A&M this offseason is that it's just been quiet. You're not hearing any drama behind the scenes like we do at Jimbo, or Jimbo creating drama the way he did when it wasn't needed. But man, Elko's just a worker. His staff is just working to get that thing together. I love every single hire he made. I love the additions he made in the portal after all the mass exodus that he had. His best hire to me was Colin Klein, getting him away from Kansas State. I can't wait to see what they do with Connor there in that offense. But A&M to me is like one of the unknowns nationally, because it has been so quiet. You don't hear anybody pumping each other up or this guy's legit or whatever. You just hear that they're going to work. You talk to people around the program there. They feel like they're going to be pretty good. It's just you got to get all those pieces together and put them on the field. It's just it's one of the more interesting teams nationally that, of course, no one's really talking about because A&M's not talking about themselves, for once. And it's fascinating to me what these Aggies are going to look like when they hit the field.
Now, I know Jimbo made himself a target at times, but I still think, even though he didn't handle it correctly, I still understand where he was coming from with the whole Saban thing, and it was time to make a move, right? and I wish we didn't have to spend the money. The university had to spend the money they have to, but at the time, it did galvanize the fan base. Unfortunately, he didn't win afterwards, and then it looks way worse.
Yeah, in retrospect, you're exactly right. But also, there's the other things he caused drama about, like just him and Han on like even that media days last year being asked about who's calling the plays, who's running the offense. Like just say something. Just say what you want to say. Things like that, every little bit, it just kind of seemingly kind of undercut kind of what his process and message was supposed to be, not just publicly, but even privately in the locker room when your head coach is saying one thing and maybe saying another behind the scenes. The Nick Saban Jimbo thing, at least to me, from a 30,000-foot view, it was just more entertainment than anything. And I absolutely, that's something that should have galvanized the Aggie fans and the Aggie faithful. I'm not so sure that, I don't know if any A&M feel this way, but I don't think anybody was really kind of looking down at Jimbo afterward or anything like that. I think a lot of people kind of went, he's kind of saying the quiet part out loud, and maybe it's about time someone did.
Brandon, I think the interesting part for Coach Elko and this A&M team is the fact that when you try to establish a new culture and a new system, that first month of the season, while not terribly daunting, is tough. Notre Dame, obviously, is a top 10 team. Going on the road to Gainesville, which Florida thinks that's a winnable game for them. Like that, and I think learning how to play as a team can only happen during games. It can't necessarily happen at practice. And I think that's going to be, so they might be a team like Auburn who's way better at the end of the year.
No, you're exactly right. And you look at that schedule for A&M, as you just mentioned, Notre Dame obviously going to be tough. Florida game will be tough. And the reason why Florida fans are saying that's a winnable game is because look at their schedule. What is winnable on their schedule? That schedule is incredibly tough, not just those last 5 games for them. But, you're exactly right. I think as much as, Aggie fans might be sitting there thinking, I kind of have an idea that we could be, a 9-win team this year, or 8-win team or whatever, which in retrospect kind of looks, when you look back over the years, the last 4 to 5 years of the SEC, you say 8 wins in the SEC, and it's almost like saying a dirty word. But in this new era of the SEC, it is going to be so freaking tough to get to 8 wins nowadays, especially if the SEC, as I believe, goes to 9 games, conference games here the next year or two. It's going to be a lot like the NFL in the AFC or whatever. A lot of teams are going to be finishing 500 that you go, well, in the Big 12 or something like that, it's probably a 9-win team, something like that. It's not necessarily a bad thing anymore. In fact, I think the SEC or the Big 10 will end up being that first conference that ends up getting a 9-3 team in the college football playoff here the next 3 to 4 years. But no, you're exactly right when it comes to getting that team together, playing together, figuring out the identity. I mean, heck, as you know, every single team, we don't quite know the identity of the team until after that first month of the season. And when you've added so many new pieces to the puzzle there through the transfer portal and everything, it's going to take some time to figure out the identity. So if I'm an A&M fan, if those games, as you mentioned, Notre Dame, which I think a lot of Aggie fans would say maybe would be a loss, but I'm going to say this: if the A&M Notre Dame game is close, that is a lot of hope for Texas A&M fans, even if it's chalked up as a loss. But I'll tell you what, when we talk about A&M this year and just all the unknowns, I just like listen to the stories about Connor, that quarterback behind the scenes, and how confident he is, and how he's almost got some swagger to him. I won't call it arrogance. I'll say it's some swagger. That's a quarterback that you want leading them through this new era, and that's what A&M needs, is someone that kind of galvanize just not the fan base like Jimbo did or whatever, saying things, but that locker room and someone they could really believe in. And I think he's going to have a huge year for them.
What if they do beat Notre Dame then?
Start up the hype machine, but make sure you temper it a little bit in College Station, because I'm telling you, we're going to, everybody says this is going to be the craziest college football season there ever. As I said, in this era, you're having coaches approach games a little bit differently. Everybody's always kind of, I'm not going to go on a big spiel here, but from talking to coaches across the country this offseason, coaches always kind of segment the season into like 3 games. And because of the playoff, these teams that feel very good about making the playoff field, like a Notre Dame or a Georgia, for example, some of them, I'm not saying those teams have, but some of them have tweaked their approaches into this season. So we talk about the NBA with the load bearing and all that stuff. Now, at the end of the season, you can see that with some of these teams, but early in the year, you wonder about their preparation for some games. I wonder how the mindset is going to be with the coaches and the players in some of these type of games. I'm not putting it out there that Notre Dame's going to overlook A&M or anything like that, but there's going to be some weird instances of some games where it just kind of looks like I think some teams are going to look very flat this year. And I think it's going to be because of this new approach a lot of coaches are trying to take. They're tweaking their way they've gone about approaching this season. And I'm interested to see how that pops up during the year, because, a lot of teams, especially Notre Dame cannot get a first round bye in the playoff this year. Remember that. They got to potentially play 17 games this year. And so a lot of coaches are worried about that type of stuff. And, the Notre Dame we might see early in the year might be actually better than the team we see at the end of the year.
Talking to Brandon Marcello here on the Boss Firearms Hotline on TexAgs Radio, presented by David Gardner's Jewelers. Let's talk about Notre Dame specifically. And there's a lot of hype around them for good reason. And when you think about their schedule, A&M, USC, those are the games that kind of pop up. What do you see about Notre Dame that makes them dangerous, and maybe potentially where are they vulnerable?
I think they finally got the receivers they need. They've got some really good guys there. They got speed. I think they finally have some game breakers. We talk about consistency at the receiver spot, not dropping passes. Last year, that kind of plagued them a little bit. Very inconsistent receiver at times. I think they've got the guys they need there. Seemingly, they pretty much replaced everybody. Everybody kind of left, and the guys that they wanted gone ended up leaving, and then the guys they wanted to get out of the portal they brought in, and then they've got some freshmen that they were kind of bringing in, or I should say freshmen, but youngsters that were coming in and coming up through the system. I really like what they've done at receiver. Obviously, I love what they did by hiring Mike Denbrock to come back and lead that offense as the offensive coordinator after his record-setting year there at LSU. They seemingly have everything to be a playoff team this year and be one that could be dangerous. But again, I do worry about Notre Dame when they can't get a first-round bye in the playoff, and there's going to be quite the load. You're going to have – listen, great teams aren't just great. They're also lucky. From the injury standpoint, you've got to stay healthy to stay alive. And man, that grind of the schedule they've got, the traditional schedule that they have, all those big time powerhouses, that's going to wear on them. And we talk about load bearing and the way coaches go about approaching things. This is a gigantic challenge for Marcus Freeman, but I'm interested to see, like, if we're sitting here at the end of November, or I should say early December, and go, man, what happened to Notre Dame? They were so good back in the 1st of October. I think that we could be discussing that a little bit because of the approaches that coaches might have to tweak a little bit. Because it's one thing to sit here and say, oh, we're going to go all out, throughout the entire season. But if you're Notre Dame and say you're already at 10 wins, in mid to late November, do you sit there going, I don't want to get this guy hurt or this guy hurt, or we need to cut back on the snaps for this guy? That could really affect a team like that.
Talking to Brandon Marcello here on TexAgs. Brandon, I want to talk LSU for a minute because a conversation that comes up on our show often is that LSU gets the benefit of the doubt because of their history, right? Yeah. We have question marks about them, and I wonder, why are people putting them at 13? But because of their history, you see why they're 13. But I do have questions, like how can that offense that bailed them out of so many games be anywhere near that, even though I know they're going to be good? And the defense, did they do enough? So why I think they're 13th in your poll. Why are they 13th? Yep. And do you see where my questions come from?
You're exactly right. And I do agree with that. And I'll even admit that one of those things is I just kind of fall in love with the logo and put them there in a lot of ways because I know what that program's capable of. I know the depth that they seemingly have every single year, just from a talent standpoint, even if it's unproven. Also, I know this is going to sound strange to say, maybe go against what a lot of other people think, but Brian Kelly has the most 10-win seasons in a row in all of college football right now. All he does is win 10 games a year. I thought last year was one of his better coaching jobs. I mean, yes, you got a Heisman Trophy winner at quarterback, but what he was able to do with that roster and the way it was, I'm not so sure LSU wins 10 games this year, but they're going to be 8 or 9 win team. And the way that offense stacks up right now, I do have the questions, yes, but I still think they're going to be able to move the ball, score points. Defensively, my big questions are in the secondary. What are they going to do there? But I kind of go in and go, I look at their roster, I see all the blue chip talent that they still have there. And then also, I just believe in Brian Kelly. Yeah, say what you will about him not winning a national championship or whatever. Our expectations are so high for a guy like that. But, I mean, he's won 7 straight years with 10 wins. No one else has done that right now after Nick Saban retired. And that's why I got LSU up there. Did I put them up too high? Probably. I'll admit it. Like I said, I think I kind of fell in love with the logo. I think there's a lot of credence to what you say. People always talk about, well, this team's only ranked up there. But I think out of all those teams that we talk about being ranked in the preseason, I know a lot of people go, well, of course you're high on Notre Dame. It's like, well, Notre Dame, if you look historically through the media polls and all that, actually kind of lived up more so to their preseason ranking than a lot of teams here, especially in recent history in the last 10 years. But a team that you kind of look at that maybe hasn't done so is an LSU, but no one really says that about them all that much, but I think you're definitely onto something there.
Is this the year that Ryan Day and Ohio State break through?
It better be. I mean, I was talking to Ross Bjork. I'm sure A&M fans don't want to hear that name, but, I was talking to him about Big Ten Media Days off to the side I just straight up ask him, what if Ryan Day loses 2 games this year, and one of them's to Michigan again? They lose to Michigan for a 4th straight year. And you miss the Big Ten title game. Maybe you get in the playoff or whatever. But what if you lose 2 games and one's to Michigan again? Like, is he a hot seat guy? He pretty much admitted that the expectations are just super high at Ohio State. But, of course, Ross Bjork's a master tactician when it comes to talking and kind of turn it around. But listen, up there right now among that fan base, if you go up there, it is like legit national championship or bust. Like, if we do not win a national championship with this roster, with the coaches we have here right now, when the hell are we going to win it? But it's so funny. Usually the Ohio State teams that end up winning a national title are the ones we weren't necessarily expecting it. And when you look here in history, but this team certainly is. I got them number 1 in my poll right now. I almost put him at number 2 just because it's like I can't trust Ohio State. But I love Will Howard at quarterback. I loved what he did at Kansas State. I mean, Colin Klein, as I mentioned earlier, with the things he did in that offense, leading him was fantastic. Will Howard and Cam Ward, I thought, were the two best players in the portal this offseason. And I can't wait to see what they do with Will Howard. I keep hearing things about how he's dropped some weight there. And with the way they want to run him, obviously in the Chip Kelly offense, I do worry about that a little bit with him dropping some weight. But yeah, it's national championship or bust for a lot of fans there. But man, and we talk about this new era, it keeps bringing that up, but it's going to be so intriguing if at the end of the year, like, what if Ohio State's sitting there at 10-2 and misses the Big Ten championship game, and then maybe still a playoff team, but what if they're 10-2? Like, what do you do if you're Ross Bjork? Because he's obviously the new AD there, and the boosters there are going to steer the ship one way or the other. They're going to tell him what to do.
Brandon, I'm interested in Michigan because of all the turnover for obvious reasons. New coach, new offensive line, new everything, right? After the national championship game. And then you got Texas going there week 2, which should be a tough game for Texas. But
yes.
Is it going to be a tough game for Texas since there's so many unknowns for Michigan?
There's unknowns offensively to a certain extent. They're set at running back. They are super talented there. Their defensive front might actually be, if not as good, maybe better than last season, considering the pieces, the depth that they've got there and the development they have. I think defensively, they're still going to be pretty salty. And for that very reason, they're a top 15 type team. But because of the dynamic play that they could potentially have now at quarterback and at running back, and those other pieces that got to get together, as you mentioned. But I'm really confident in Michigan being able to start off pretty well this year because of that defense, because of what they've got there. But, man, the biggest wild card, of course, is just, Sharon Moore being the head coach now. But more so, I mean, goodness gracious, the reason why they promoted him is because they were looking for the consistency year to year. But they lost the entire staff. They weren't expecting that. That's a huge thing to go through year over year, especially when you've already got that championship pedigree in there and you're going in and you're like, the only familiar face I see is Sharon Moore. That's daunting. But they do have some really good senior leadership, veteran leadership up there. I'm in love with Donovan Edwards as a running back and also as a person. I wrote about him a week or so ago and just the type of guy he's turned into as a leader. But Michigan's going to be carried by that defense, I think, especially in the early part of that schedule. And listen, Texas, Michigan's one of my, right now, when you look at it on paper, it's definitely one of the games of the year because of just what it can mean for both programs.
Brandon, I want to ask you about Georgia, but through several different lenses, right? You've got the off-the-field stuff, and it's bad, right? You've got the schedule, and you've got a Heisman Trophy contending quarterback. So kind of with all those kind of ingredients, what do you see for Georgia in this year?
You know what? Knowing Kirby Smart and the type of coach he is, all this outside noise is just going to absolutely feed that monster. Georgia, I think, is going to feed off of that big time and be someone that can just be an absolute road grader in the SEC that I wouldn't say don't necessarily see coming because, I mean, listen, we all got them in the top 3 in our polls, right? But, man, I think if anything, that could really galvanize that roster with everything that's happened in the offseason. I think Carson Beck is the best quarterback in the country. I love what he did in the second half of last season. I think that Auburn game on the road, really, that's when he took over that team and everybody got on his back and they believed in him. He's got the quickest release, I believe, in all of college football. You just talk about the ball getting out of his hands. And in that offense, obviously any offense, that's important. But in that offense, it's very important. He's got talent all around him. But to me, they've got that leader at quarterback right now. And with all this outside noise and Kirby Smart, the way he feeds off that stuff, that I think they're going to be an absolutely dangerous team, a team that could potentially be going into this year and just start blowing teams out and not making things close in a lot of these games.
I do want to ask you one more. I'm keeping you long, so I apologize. But Tyler Van Dyke, I know you wrote about him. A&M played him a couple different times over the last few years, and he had a pretty good game against A&M last year, but that's because they couldn't cover anybody. What do you expect from him this year at Wisconsin?
I think, to me, he's just got to stay healthy. They've had him drop some weight, about 10 pounds. There were some struggles in the spring, I'm told. Not some things that maybe the coaches weren't necessarily going about. And that's why he's such an intriguing thing for Wisconsin, is because at Miami, as we all know, that freshman year, he was just stellar. In that offense under Rhett Lashley at the time, I thought he was sitting there. I was like, all right, if we're going to see Miami back into ACC contention, it's going to be because of him, bringing everybody else along with him. But I think injuries, and then also got to his head a little bit. I think, the joke among a lot of the Miami fans was, if you want to beat Tyler Van Dyke, just throw zone coverage at him because he can't dissect it. But it's not as simple as that, as we all know. He's got a great arm. I think what also gets him in trouble is because he's got that great arm, he tries to fit things in the windows. Phil Longo, the offensive coordinator at Wisconsin, has talked about that quite a bit this offseason, trying to corral that a little bit. But to me, for me, he's just got to stay healthy. He's got to stay healthy. Last year, he dealt with a weird injury where I believe the muscle was coming off of the fat tissue and the bone beneath his right knee. And they didn't really talk about that in the second half of the season. And that just so happened to coincide when I think he threw like 5 interceptions in a 3-game stretch and then got benched. Keep him healthy and keep his confidence up. And he's someone that should keep that offense going. It's just so interesting in Wisconsin that Luke Fickell, a guy who he's about developing talent, has had to lean on 2 transfer quarterbacks in his first 2 years, 2 different ones there. And, he told me last week, that's not something we want to do here at Wisconsin. It's not something I want to do. So this is kind of a stopgap for them this year. They've got a little bit more power at receiver. They didn't have a lot of depth there last year. They were very one-dimensional in the passing game as a result. They were just focusing on one guy, Will Pauling, who almost set the Wisconsin record in pass catches for a season with 74. So they should be better, but I'm not so sure how much better, because Van Dyke could go, I say one or two ways, but the last 2-3 years for him, it's just been, it goes south every year. It seems like he's good for about 3 or 4 games and then falls off the cliff. You look at what he did last year at Miami. I think he was leading the ACC in pass completion percentage and yardage through the first 4 games of the year, and then just nosedived after that. They can't have that at Wisconsin this year, because they're counting on him to be the one that kind of gets them over the hump.
Brandon, I appreciate you, sir, man. Thanks so much for making time. I know we've been trying to do this for a couple of years. It's good to get you on the show.
Absolutely. Anytime. Thanks for having me.